For a decade, Kane had spoken to no one but his horse and the wind. The solitude was a fortress he had built brick by silent brick, a penance for a life of noise and violence he had left behind in a city of ghosts. His world was the sweep of the sun across the high plains, the creak of worn leather, the hard-packed dirt under his boots. Then, on a Tuesday scorched by the late summer sun, the fortress was breached. He saw her at the edge of the cottonwoods that bordered the creek, a flicker of pale movement against the deepening green of the leaves. She was staggering, her form stark and impossibly vulnerable in the unforgiving light. When he drew closer, the sight froze the air in his lungs. She was a young woman, Asian, her body a roadmap of cruelty, covered in a tapestry of bruises and cuts. She was naked, shivering despite the heat, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have burned all other emotions away. He stopped the horse, his hand instinctively going not to the rifle in its scabbard, but to the canteen at his hip. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, unthreatening. He said nothing. Words were useless things here. He unstrapped the heavy wool blanket from behind his saddle and held it out. Her eyes darted from his face to the blanket, a desperate, animal calculation of risk. After a long moment, she took a stumbling step forward and snatched it, wrapping it around herself in a single, desperate motion. He offered the canteen next. Her hands trembled as she took it, water spilling down her chin as she drank with a raw, guttural thirst. She sank to the ground, the blanket clutched around her like a prayer. Her first words were a ragged whisper, a language he didn't understand, followed by two she must have bled to learn. Please. Shelter. He led her back to the simple ranch house, a sturdy structure of timber and stone that had weathered 100 years of storms. He pointed her toward the small bathroom, leaving a clean shirt and a pair of old work pants on a chair outside the door. While she washed away the filth of her ordeal, he moved with the quiet efficiency of a man long accustomed to his own company. He stitched a gash on his own forearm from a run-in with a barbed wire fence earlier, his movements precise and detached. He was heating a can of stew on the stove when she emerged, swallowed by his clothes, her wet hair clinging to her neck. The terror in her eyes had receded, replaced by a fragile, watchful calm. He gestured to the table, and she Saturday. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against tin. Her gaze kept flicking to the long, dust-choked road that was the only artery connecting his ranch to the outside world. She was listening for something. He was too. The piece of his land felt thin, a sheet of glass waiting for the first stone. It came an hour later. A plume of dust on the horizon, moving too fast for a farm truck. A black SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the dying sun like chips of obsidian. It rolled to a stop 50 yards from the porch, and 3 men emerged. They wore slick city clothes that looked absurd against the rugged landscape. They moved with the lazy arrogance of predators who had never known fear. One of them, a man with a cruel smile, stepped forward. "Evening, old-timer," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Lost some property. A valuable little thing. Seen her?" Kane stepped onto the porch, the old wood groaning under his weight. He held a heavy, worn axe, which he'd been using to split kindling. He rested its head on the porch railing. "Only thing on this land that's lost," Kane said, his voice a low gravelly thing, rusted from disuse, "is you." The man's smile tightened. "Let's not make this difficult," he gestured to his 2 companions, who began to spread out, flanking the house. "She doesn't belong to you." Kane's grip on the axe handle whitened. "Nothing here belongs to you," he replied, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. The first man sighed, a theatrical display of impatience, and reached inside his jacket. He never cleared the leather. The axe left Kane's hand in a blur of spinning steel, crossing the space between them with impossible speed and embedding itself deep in the man's chest. He crumpled without a sound. The other 2 froze for a split second, their minds unable to process what they'd just seen. That second was all Kane needed. He was already moving, vaulting over the railing and drawing a heavy-caliber revolver from the small of his back. The first shot took the man on the right through the throat. The second caught the last man as he fumbled for his weapon, a clean, final shot to the forehead. Silence descended again, thick and heavy with the smell of gunpowder and blood. From the window, the young woman watched, her expression not of fear, but of stark, stunning awe. Cain dragged the bodies to the old barn, the one he used for storage, and covered them with a heavy tarp. He moved the SUV behind the structure, out of sight from the road. The sun had bled out below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple. Back in the house, the smell of antiseptic filled the air. The young woman sat at the table, her back rigid. She pointed to a spot just below her shoulder blade. Cain looked closer and saw it, a small, raised welt, too perfectly circular to be natural. He fetched a first aid kit and a razor-sharp skinning knife. "This will hurt," he said. She nodded once, her jaw tight. He made a shallow, precise incision. Beneath the skin was a small, metallic disc, no bigger than a grain of rice, with a faintly blinking lead. A tracker. He tweezed it out, dropped it onto the table with a faint click, and then expertly stitched the small wound closed. The sight of the device confirmed his darkest suspicions. She wasn't a simple runaway. She was cargo. Property, tagged and monitored. He crushed the tracker under the heel of his boot, grinding it into the floorboards until it was nothing but glittering dust. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. Her name, she managed, was Mai Lin. She spoke in broken, halting English, but the story she wove with her words and her hands was terrifyingly clear. A shipping container. Other girls, dozens of them. A wealthy man in the city whose name she had heard whispered in fear, Sterling. They thought she was broken, useless after a failed escape attempt, and had brought her to a remote location for disposal. She had made a second, desperate run for it, this time succeeding. Her escape had been a fluke, a moment of chaos she had seized. But they would not stop looking. Sterling did not tolerate losses. The ranch, once his sanctuary, was now the last line of defense. Her fight had become his. He had known it the moment he saw her, but the cold, blinking piece of technology made it real. The violence he had tried to bury was being called forth again, not for money or for a cause he no longer believed in, but for the terrified, determined woman sitting at his kitchen table. He knew they would send more men. Sterling would not consider the first three a match for a lone rancher, he would consider them an embarrassment to be rectified with overwhelming force. Cain did not intend to be overwhelmed. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned not with the simple hunting rifle he kept by the door, but with a long, heavy-duty Pelican case he dragged from beneath his bed. He clicked the latches open, revealing a bed of custom-cut foam. Nestled within was a military-grade M4 carbine, several magazines, a sidearm with a threaded barrel, and a box of ammunition that was definitely not for hunting deer. The hardware of a past life. Mai Lin watched him, her eyes wide. He worked with practiced ease, checking the action on the rifle, loading the magazines with swift, precise movements. He was no farmer. He was something else entirely. He looked up and met her gaze. "You need to know how to use this," he said, placing a simple, reliable pump-action shotgun on the table. He spent the next hour showing her the mechanics of loading, the safety, how to aim, how to brace for the recoil. He didn't treat her like a victim, but like a soldier. And she learned like one. Her hands were steady, her movements quick to mimic his. The fear that had defined her was being forged into something else, a cold, hard resolve. They worked together, barricading the windows with heavy furniture and thick planks of wood from the barn. They established fields of fire, turning the simple home into a defensible fortress. He gave her a position in the back bedroom, a vantage point that covered the rear approach. "They will come from the front," he stated, not as a guess, but as a fact. "They are arrogant. But if they are smart, they will try to flank. You will stop them." She didn't speak, but her nod was firm. There was no tremor in her hands as she held the shotgun. In the quiet darkness, as they waited, a silent understanding passed between them. They were two solitary souls, cornered and outnumbered, but they would not be taken easily. The fortress of his solitude had fallen, only to be replaced by a fortress of defiance they had built together. The second dust cloud appeared with the morning sun. It was a single vehicle, but it was not another black SUV. It was a county sheriff's cruiser, its official markings a grotesque parody of the law in this lawless place. The car crunched to a halt beside the bloodstains from the night before, stains Kane hadn't bothered to wash away. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, a silver star pinned to his chest. He was tall, with a politician's smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. This was Sheriff Brody. He sauntered toward the porch, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. "Morning," Brody called out, his tone deceptively friendly. "Got a call about a disturbance out this way. Everything all right?" Kane stood in the doorway, the M4 held loosely at his side, its presence a clear and deliberate statement. "Everything's quiet," Kane replied. Brody's eyes flickered from Kane to the rifle and then scanned the house, noting the boarded windows. His smile wavered. "Look, son, I'm going to be straight with you. I know you've got a girl in there. A runaway. She's caused a lot of trouble for a very important man, a Mr. Sterling. He's a pillar of our community." Brody took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone. "He's willing to be generous. He'll forget this whole misunderstanding ever happened. You just give her back. We can all go about our day." The casual way he spoke of a human being as a piece of misplaced property made Kane's blood run cold. This wasn't just a corrupt cop, this was a man whose soul had been hollowed out and filled with someone else's greed. "She's not property," Kane said, his voice dangerously low. "And you're not a sheriff. You're a delivery boy." Brody's face hardened, the folksy mask dropping away to reveal the ugliness beneath. "You're making a big mistake. You have no idea who you're messing with. Sterling owns this whole valley, including me." He pointed a thick finger at Kane. "You have 1 hour. 1 hour to put her on this porch. All my deputies and I are going to come in and get her. And we won't be gentle." He turned without waiting for a response, climbed back into his cruiser, and drove to the end of the long driveway, parking his vehicle sideways to block the only path out. The hour passed in suffocating silence. The sun climbed higher, baking the dry earth. Through his rifle's scope, Kane watched as 2 more trucks arrived, parking behind the sheriff's car. They weren't patrol vehicles. They were heavy-duty pickups, and the men who got out were not wearing uniforms. They were carrying rifles and wearing tactical vests. Sterling's private army, sanctioned by the local law. They were setting up a perimeter, taking positions behind rocks and the sparse cover the landscape offered. It was a siege. Inside the house, the air was thick with tension. Kane moved from window to window, tracking their movements, his mind a cold machine of angles and trajectories. He checked on Mai Lin. She was in position, shotgun held at a low ready, her eyes fixed on the empty expanse behind the house. She wasn't trembling. Her face was a mask of concentration. He placed 2 boxes of shells on the floor beside her. "Don't fire until they're close," he said. "Make it count." She glanced up at him, and in that moment, he saw the last flicker of the terrified victim die out, replaced by the grim determination of a survivor who had decided she would rather die fighting than ever be a victim again. She gave a single, sharp nod. He returned to the front room, settling into a spot behind the heavy oak table he'd overturned. The house was quiet, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. He could feel the weight of the dozen men outside, their impatience, their bloodlust. They thought he was an old man, a fool. They thought they had him trapped. But he wasn't trapped. He was cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. The first crack of a rifle shot a spiderweb through the front window, and the siege began. They came at dusk, using the failing light as cover. The assault was a coordinated press from 3 sides. Gunfire erupted, tearing chunks of wood from the walls and shattering what little glass remained. The air filled with the roar of rifles and the smell of cordite. Kane was methodical, a ghost in the dim light of the house. He fired in short, controlled bursts, never wasting a shot. Each crack of his rifle was answered by a cry of pain from outside. He moved between the front and side windows, presenting a shifting target, making it seem like there was more than one shooter inside. They were concentrating their fire on the front, just as he predicted. Arrogant. Suddenly, a new sound, the splintering of the back door. They had sent a team to flank them. A voice inside Kane's head screamed a warning, but before he could move, the blast of a shotgun echoed from the rear of the house. It was followed by a human scream, cut short. Then a second blast. Kane raced to the back hallway. Two men in tactical gear were sprawled on the floor of the kitchen, their assault cut brutally short. Mylin stood in the bedroom doorway, smoke curling from the barrel of her shotgun. Her face was pale, but her hands were rock-steady as she expertly worked the pump, chambering a new round. She had not hesitated. She had held her ground. She had become as much of a warrior as he was. A surge of pride, fierce and protective, coursed through him. He gave her a sharp nod of approval before turning back to the main fight. But they both knew their victory was temporary. The volume of fire from outside was increasing. Bullets ripped through the walls. They were being pinned down, their ammunition dwindling. It was a battle of attrition, and time was running out. Just as the front door splintered under the impact of a battering ram, a new sound cut through the cacophony of the firefight. It was the high-pitched wail of sirens, not the familiar yelp of a county cruiser, but the powerful, authoritative blare of federal vehicles. Headlights, brighter than anything Kane had ever seen, sliced through the twilight, flooding the entire scene in a blinding white glare. For black, armored Suburbans roared up the driveway, scattering Sterling's men like rats. A voice, amplified by a bullhorn, boomed across the ranch, a voice of absolute command. U.S. Marshals! Drop your weapons and get on the ground. Now! For a moment, there was chaos and confusion. Some of Sterling's men, caught between the fortified house and the arriving federal force, tried to shoot their way out. They were cut down with ruthless efficiency by disciplined bursts of automatic fire from the marshals. Sheriff Brody stood frozen in the glare of the headlights, his face a mask of pure disbelief. He dropped his rifle as two heavily armed marshals descended on him, slamming him face-first into the dirt and wrenching his arms behind his back. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. The sheer, unexpected arrival of a higher authority had shattered the siege completely. The silence that fell was more profound than any that had come before. Kane lowered his rifle, his ears ringing. He looked at Mylin, who was staring out the window, her shotgun still clutched in her hands, her knuckles white. He walked over and gently placed his hand over hers, easing the weapon from her grip. Her fight was over. Slowly, the tension drained from her shoulders, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked not like a fighter or a victim, but simply like a young woman who had survived an impossible ordeal. A tall man in a tactical vest with U.S. Marshal emblazoned in yellow across the front stepped through the ruined doorway. His name was Vance, and his eyes held no judgment, only a weary professionalism. He surveyed the damage, the bodies, then looked at Kane and Mylin. "You two have had quite a night," he said, his voice calm and steady. He explained that his team had been building a RICO case against Sterling for over a year, trafficking, racketeering, political corruption. They knew he was using remote locations for his dirty work, but they could never pinpoint them. "Your 911 call from a burner phone an hour ago, miss," he said, looking at Mylin with respect, "reporting a corrupt sheriff aiding a kidnapping at this address, gave us the probable cause we needed to roll in hard. Sterling's whole operation is coming down tonight." He assured Mylin she was safe now. She would be a material witness, given protection, a new life, anything she needed. The system that had failed her was now, finally, going to protect her. Medics came in to check on them, but neither was seriously injured. As the federal agents processed the scene, securing evidence and cuffing the remaining gunman, Kane felt a familiar pull, the desire to retreat, to melt back into the shadows and let the world handle its own mess. His part was done. But as he turned to walk back into the dim interior of his house, a hand gently took his. It was Mylin. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and full of an emotion that went far beyond simple gratitude. It was a look of profound connection, of seeing and being seen. In her gaze, he saw not a request for more protection, but an offer of something else entirely, companionship. He had saved her life, and in doing so, she had shattered the walls of his solitude forever. He looked at her small hand in his large, calloused one and did not pull away. 1 year passed. The seasons turned, washing the high plains with the green of spring, the gold of summer, and the crisp brown of autumn. The ranch was no longer a fortress, but a home. The bullet holes in the walls were patched and painted, the splintered door was replaced with solid oak, and new glass sat gleaming in the window frames. Out front, where blood had once soaked the earth, a small, vibrant garden now grew, thick with tomato vines and rows of stubborn corn. Cain was on the porch, mending a piece of tack, his movements as deliberate and quiet as ever. But he was not alone. Mylene emerged from the house, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She wore jeans and a simple cotton shirt, her hair grown long and tied back from her face. The haunted, hunted look in her eyes was a distant memory, replaced by a deep and abiding peace. She moved with an easy confidence, a woman who had reclaimed not just her freedom, but her very self. She handed him a glass, their fingers brushing. A simple, everyday touch that held the weight of everything they had endured and everything they had become. They sat together on the porch swing, the gentle creak of its chains the only sound besides the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass. No words were needed between them. Their silence was not one of emptiness, but of a complete and total understanding. He had been a man hiding from the world, and she had been a woman the world had tried to break. Together, on this small patch of land, they had found a sanctuary. He looked out at the endless horizon, the same view he had watched for 10 solitary years, and for the first time, it didn't look like an empty expanse. It looked like a beginning. What you just saw was a story about how sometimes, the quietest lives are interrupted by the loudest calls for justice. I wanted to explore the idea that the walls we build to protect ourselves can also become our prisons, and that true strength is found not in isolation, but in standing up for someone who cannot stand for themselves. The characters of Cain and Mylene show us that even after the deepest trauma, healing is possible, and that unlikely bonds can be forged in the most intense fires. What do you think was the defining moment in Mylene's transformation from a victim to a survivor? Was it when she first saw Cain fight, or was it when she took up a weapon herself? Let me know what you believe in the comments below. If you were captivated by this tale of a lone protector finding redemption, then I guarantee you will love the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's a story about a former Army Ranger who discovers a dark conspiracy in the small town he retired to, forcing him to become the one-man army he swore he'd never be again. Go ahead and click on that video, and I promise you another journey into the heart of courage and justice. I'll see you there.